Hi kids, nice to see you again. And I know that a lot of you are not kids, but this is really intended for those kids who are interested in cooking and during this time of COVID are at home, perhaps getting a little bit annoyed with what's going on. So get on with the job of cooking, and today we're going to prepare a sponge. Look, you all have birthdays and anniversaries and whatnot. And in fact, thinking about that, Father's Day I think is coming up. Why not make a sponge cake instead of, going always to the barbecue and those manly things? Why don't you do today a sponge for your, why don't you do in this occasion a sponge for your dad? And here, Paul, our able baker and friend of 15 years we worked together, he's going to demonstrate it because he's the master at it. So Paul, what have we got?
Okay, so in the bowl here I have 6 eggs and 6 egg yolks. I used extra large eggs for this. Here we have 250 grams of caster sugar. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to warm this mixture up over some boiling water on the stove. What this does is it just makes it whip up a lot better. So if the eggs are cold, they don't whip up as much.
Yeah, we have the habit of keeping eggs in the fridge, and by warming it up, it'll fluff up when it gets beaten a lot more easily. But be careful, you put it over a small pot of boiling water on very low heat, so you virtually just get the steam into this very cold bowl. And the stainless steel itself is very cold, so you got cold eggs, cold stainless steel, so be very careful. You don't want to curdle, otherwise you end up with scrambled egg and you can serve them for breakfast. But just a little bit, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, so I just put my finger in to test it, and once it's warm to the touch, then it's good to go. I'm even going to turn that up just a little bit, just to...
Warm to the touch, remember that? Paul, if you avoided this step, it still beats up.
It
takes longer.
But your sponge cake will probably be denser.
Yeah. If you want fluffy and beautifully light, it's better if you follow this system.
And the whole secret of this sponge cake, which is, by the way, a Genoese Italian sponge cake, there isn't any baking powder, there aren't any rising
There's no crap in it. Yeah, so it's just all natural ingredients.
Okay, that's ready to go. It's warm to the touch. So I'm going to put it on a stand mixer. Thank you, Steph. Now you can also use a handheld mixer at home.
Yeah. Not everyone's got a.
I wouldn't recommend using a whisk and trying to do it by hand.
A whisk would be, you need a lot of muscles and a long time. You need a machine or
yeah. Now this will take about 5 to 10 minutes, so we'll be back in just a few minutes.
See you shortly. 6 eggs, 200 grams of sugar, and a miracle happens every time. Isn't it beautiful? Look at that fluffy, gorgeous mixture.
So it's been about 5 minutes now, and as Steph was saying, the mixture looks really
silky,
nice and light, and you can see that. And then when you put your finger in, you can draw a line, and it holds the line for a second or so. That's
just
when
a
you
test,
know,
isn't it?
Yeah,
that's when you know
it's perfect.
Is there a danger of overbeating it?
No, there's no danger. And also, if you get interrupted, you can leave it and then come back and re-whip it.
But when you do these things, try to have a clear 1 hour or so of your time so you can concentrate and don't panic. I've always had panic with desserts by nature.
So now I've got some 250 grams of melted butter, which is not hot butter, but you want it to be so you can barely, you think you can barely touch it. That's going to go straight in.
What does the butter do?
The butter just gives added flavour and a little bit more character to the sponge.
Could you do without it?
You can do it without butter. You can use olive oil,
Right.
which works out really well as well. So
We might do it with olive oil
But
next time.
traditionally, butter is the go. Now at this stage, you don't want to mix it up too much.
Otherwise you run the risk of losing the
So
fluffiness.
it's still really beautiful.
Give me that. I'll go and leak that.
Now, I've already sifted the flour once. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sift it in 3 batches and mix it in with my hand. The reason I use my hand is because you can feel where the flour is inside. If you're wearing gloves, or if you use a spoon or a metal spatula, which some people like to do, you can't actually feel flour, and sometimes you can get lumps of flour. So what I'm doing is I'm just gently folding this flour in, shaking it off a little bit to get the lumps out. And when I feel that the flour's all mixed in, then I'll go with the next batch of flour.
But you don't want to overdo it either, again.
No, if you mix it too much with your hand, you're gonna lose all the air, and then you'll have a flat sponge, which we don't want. And at this
But
stage,
if it happens, don't throw it away.
oh no,
You can make all sorts of things
Well,
even with a flat sponge.
yeah, no.
You can make a tiramisu, for instance.
Yeah,
or-
for sure.
or-
You can even do little savoiardi biscuits. You can pipe the mixture out.
Savoiardi is the type of biscuit you need to make a tiramisu. But in other words, you can turn failure into something else, and you don't waste the egg, the sugar, and the labor you put into it. But hopefully, if you follow these instructions, you won't have a problem.
And as I said, using my hand, I can feel exactly where that flour is, and sometimes it tends to pool in the bottom of the bowl. So by being able to feel it, you can tell exactly where that flour is, and it mixes so much better. There's nothing worse than having a sponge cake that's got little lumps of flour in it.
Yeah,
It's like you eat it and then
it's just like when you cook polenta, and if it traps some polenta into the mix, and it's uncooked, when you eat it, you have this mouthful of raw stuff.
So that's the last of the flour and corn flour mixture. Thank you, Steph. Now gently, once I've got this folded in, then I'm just going to put it straight into that tray.
It's actually quite astounding how resilient it is, because Paul said don't overhandle it, but in fact it's been going for a couple of minutes now.
Yeah.
And it's always to me a wonderful miracle how there's still enough air for the sponge to rise in the cooking process.
That's all
so
good.
there it is.
So it's going to go straight in the tray.
Now this is a big tray and a fairly large amount of sponge. You probably don't need that for a homemade cake, but you can have the quantities and then use a different shape tin or wouldn't you say?
A half size of this, which would fit into your domestic oven, would be perfect.
Yeah,
So
and you can use a round tin. Yeah,
absolutely.
and if you do, you line it on the bottom.
So just very, very gently, because you don't want to knock out too much air. And just evening it up. Make sure it's level. And that's about it. Now, what I'm going to do next will probably surprise you, but I'm going to drop it like that. This just gets any large air bubbles out of it, and also helps with the leveling. I'm going to put it into a fan forced oven at 160 degrees Celsius. A domestic oven at home, I would probably go 180, and it's going to bake for about half an hour because it's quite thick. So straight into the oven. Thank you, Steph. And we'll come back in half an hour, and it should be perfect. Now I'm just going to check it to make sure it's fully baked. I'm just going to lightly touch it in the middle, and if it doesn't sink down, then it's done. And I'm just going to say that's perfect. So I'm going to pull that out.
Look at that.
And it looks sensational. Now, normally you wouldn't do this, but
You let it cool.
you can cut it just like so. And Steph's going to have look at that.
Look at that. Look, it's still warm. We should let it cool, but look at how fluffy it is and a beautiful golden color. To me, it just wants to be eaten. It's screaming, eat me. You know, just as is. Fabulous pork. It's fantastic.
And the smell is like it's filled the whole
The aroma fills the whole house. If you cook it around me at the kitchen, yeah. So, how about next week we can show the kids what to do with it. I mean, you can just put some whipped cream with strawberries there. This is sweet enough to just carry the whole thing. With a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, it's just heaven in the afternoon, believe me. But Paul and I will show you next week the number of things you can do with the sponge. So we'll show you the custard cream.
Yeah.
You can go into it.
So I make a creme patissiere, and then there's two ways you can either have that as it is, or you can fold cream into it to make it very nice and light.
And you can go into
truffles and yeah,
all sorts of things. So we'll show you that next week. But as you've probably appreciated by watching the process, if you follow the steps, don't rush, be calm, be cool, and we'll turn out. All right? See you next week. Thank you, Paul.
Ciao guys.